Are they worried about humanitarian concerns, or are they actually worried about their bottom line?
This fucking guy has been a Catholic for like 2 seconds, and he converts to the church. And he's like, I've got some complaints. All right, you're caring a little bit too much about the indigent and the poor. Hello and welcome to the Bulwark Podcast. I'm your host, Tim Miller. It's Monday, January 27th. Trump's been president again for about a week now. Feels longer. And I'm here today with Bill Kristol. How you doing, Bill?
It does feel longer than a week.
It does.
I don't know if it feels like a month, 6 months, or a year, but we're not even talking like a little longer than a week, right?
Yeah. We are gathering today, as you note in the morning newsletter, on Holocaust Remembrance Day. So I think it's probably worth starting there. Shadow President Elon Musk zoomed in to a conference of the AfD, which is the German far-right party. At that gathering, he said he thinks that there's too much focused on past guilt, and we need to move beyond that. You had a little meditation on this for Holocaust Remembrance Day today. I'd like for you to share your thoughts on that.
Well, it's Musk, of course, had done the salute, which wasn't really, of course, a fascist and Nazi salute. On Monday, he joked about it during the week. I actually wrote about that in Friday's Morning Shots. Then Saturday, he decided to video into an AfD rally in Germany. And okay, he's endorsed them. He likes them. It's so indefensible in any case. But I suppose if you wanted to defend him, you could say he likes them for other reasons. They don't like,
tax cuts.
The EU bureaucracy, tax cuts, Gorsuch, whatever they're for, judicial appointments. And instead, he actually focused on...
What would be the German Gorsuch name?
Yeah, I know. I don't know. And I feel bad from Gorsuch there. That wasn't quite fair. But anyway. Instead he focuses on what is at the heart of their appeal, or one of their major appeals, which is a kind of, we've got to get beyond this excessive cult of guilt. Musk actually used that phrase, I believe, and that's a phrase they use over there about, remembering the Holocaust, basically. And so I quote in the Morning Shots this tweet stream I came across. I don't know the man at all. Professor Martin Sauerbrey, based on Google. He seems to be a 45-year-old or so German historian, and very impressive.
I love that he's at the Ludwig Boltzmann Institute for Research on the Consequences of War. That's a great title. And it's a movie. I mean, he makes some obvious points. For one point, Musk wants to say is, Germany's been crippled by this guilt. Germany's had a pretty good run since 1945. West Germany first, and then all of Germany. We've helped them. They're a good part of the West. I mean, really, they've been crippled. Is that a country that hasn't done better than we might have expected over the last 70 years? And partly because they did come to grips with the Holocaust more than others, more than Austria. In any case, Sauerbrey makes this point, and then makes a personal point about his own, what he is not crippled by a cult of guilt, but he also thinks that not to be serious about one's nation's past and about and to take that seriously is denial. It is avoidance of moral responsibility and avoidance of political responsibility in terms of how to prevent this from happening again. I didn't make this point in Morning Shots, but you read it and you think a little bit about our own issues with slavery and with our past, and coming to grips with it over the last 60, 70 years, but the last 10, 20 too as well, and how healthy that has been. It could go a little too far, sure. But anyway, the idea that Musk calls in on Saturday to encourage them to basically minimize the Holocaust 2 days before Holocaust Remembrance Day, pretty appalling. And then this morning, they're having these moving ceremonies at Auschwitz in Poland, and it's the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz by the Red Army, by Soviet troops coming from the East. Interestingly, they stopped inviting Putin to these, or any Russian government representative to these celebrations after the invasion of Ukraine, because they correctly understood this is what Putin is doing does not entitle him to be on the side of the liberationists, So they have a kind of sense of the current relevance of what they are commemorating. But the King Charles is there. I can't quite
get used to saying King Charles, but King Charles III of Great Britain is there, and Macron from France, and Trudeau from Canada. We have if I could say honestly, a slightly second-tier delegation of some cabinet.
I think lower than second tier. Charles Kushner, straight out of jail.
Charles Kushner is going to be our ambassador to France. I think someone who's going to be our commerce secretary and a representative for the Middle East, all Jews, which actually isn't appropriate. Jews have a special connection to all this, and no question. Though it was not only Jews who were killed at Auschwitz, obviously, but predominantly. But Macron came. He's not Jewish. King Charles came. He's not Jewish. The German chancellor, president, and the chancellor who's outgoing and his likely replacement all came. Germany has a special standing. Trudeau is not Jewish. It's something that should be of concern to everyone. Trump sends kind of 3 semi-high-ranking Jews from his administration who have been nominated to be in his administration. And meanwhile, Musk, who's much more powerful than any of those 3, is busy giving speeches to the alternative for Germany, the kind of success, the anti-Nazi party at the very least. So it got me a little bit upset.
Yeah, and it is a good parallel to as you're saying, to what is kind of happening in America, right? With the woke-lash about the Elon message about not remembering so deeply all of this stuff. We had over the weekend that as part of the DEI initiatives, the Air Force said that they're going to stop teaching about the Tuskegee Airmen. There was mass outrage about that, and they might be reinstating that lesson. But like the idea is there, the principle of let's try to bury isn't an unpleasant story. It's only an unpleasant story in the sense that at the time they're being discriminated against. Right?
Well, and a reminder that
equal rights.
That the military was segregated at that time, which again I don't think that takes away from what the U.S. did in World War II, and certainly not what the black members of the military in segregated units did. But yes, that's why they don't like it. The whites. It's a reminder that all was not well. They want to yearn for the 40s. But all was not well in the U.S. in the 40s and 50s. Hegseth this morning, I just saw this before coming on with you, referred in passing, I guess it was in passing, I don't know how intentional it was, to Fort Bragg, which was renamed Fort Liberty, I think. Yeah. 4 years ago. Bragg was a particularly noxious Confederate general.
Yes.
So that's part of Hegseth's kind of, what? Well, that is, it's one thing if you didn't think about it in 1990, you talk about Fort Bragg. We all did that, obviously. Right. But it became an issue. It was the military recommended changes. The Biden administration put them in place. And now they're going out of their way to what? That really is like going out of your way to praise some quasi, in the German context, some, not Hitler, obviously, but some quasi-fascist figure from the 20s or something, right? I mean, it's deeply creepy.
They're not naming military bases in Germany after Nazi generals.
I don't know.
Is that not happening over there? We're bringing it back. We're bringing back the Confederate general naming. We needed to make sure that all of the great Confederates are honored in this country. That is what America First patriots do: is honor the traitors. All right, I gave you the floor to rant about the mistreatment of the Jewish people by Elon Musk. I've got some Catholic complaints. J.D. Vance was on Face the Nation over the weekend. I want to hear him talking about the Catholic Church.
The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops this week condemned some of the executive orders signed by President Trump, specifically those allowing immigration and customs enforcement to enter churches and to enter schools. Do you personally support the idea of conducting a raid or enforcement action in a church service, at a school?
Well, let me address this. Of course, if you have a person who is convicted of a violent crime, whether they're an illegal immigrant or a non-illegal immigrant, you have to go and get that person to protect the public safety. That's not unique to immigration. But let me just address this particular issue, Margaret, because as a practicing Catholic, I was actually heartbroken by that statement. And I think that the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops needs to actually look in the mirror a little bit and recognize that when they receive over $100 million to help resettle illegal immigrants, are they worried about humanitarian concerns, or are they actually worried about their bottom line?
This fucking guy has been a Catholic for like 2 seconds, and he converts to the church. And he's like, I've got some complaints. All right, you're caring a little bit too much about the indigent and the poor. We need to focus on the real reasons why I became a Catholic, the real Catholic stuff, making people feel guilty anti-trans sentiment. Like, what? I just, he didn't even have to do it. Like, he had answered the question, which is frankly, maybe we'll see how these guys execute their immigration raids. I'm not so confident they're going to be very judicious, but maybe they just have changed the rule to be able to go into a church because there's some violent criminal they want, and that's the only way they know how to get the person. Who knows if that's going to happen, but that is a fair dodge as a politician. And then on top of that, he's got to be like, I'm just, as somebody who's been a Catholic since last Tuesday, I am just heartbroken that these bishops that gave their life to the church care at all about the poor immigrants that we're planning on putting on planes and shackles back to their country. Any other thoughts on that, Bill?
Well, I'll leave the Catholics to you, and you leave the Jews to me. We have a good ecumenical division of labor on this.
We've podcast, got a joke coming here. We got a rabbi and a priest.
Well, we need Sarah to come on and take care of the Protestants, I suppose. But no, I just would make one other point that struck me from the outside, so to speak. It's not enough to say, well, as you say, he made his point. He can defend the detentions and the raids and all that. He could have even said, a normal, if I might say, vice president in this circumstance might have said, I respect the Catholics. They spend a lot of money on they do try hard to help immigrants. I think some of these policies, though, could be misguided because they could be an inducement for them to come in. I mean, whatever you want to say, right? I mean, you can have a sort of, a critique of their understanding of public policy. He doesn't do that. He says they're in it for the money. Sally, that is actual bigotry. I mean, unless he has evidence that a lot of people are getting very rich over there at the, working in Catholic relief missions and food shelters and so forth, helping immigrants. I mean, it's really disgusting.
Well, it can't be.
You were too nice to him.
Yeah, thank you, Drill. It can't be anti-Catholic bigotry because he became a Catholic. It's kind of like in Seinfeld where the guy becomes a dentist for the jokes. Yeah. Does he become a dentist for the jokes or become a Jew for the jokes? I forget the story. Like, you are an anti-dentite. So it's one of those situations, right? I've become a Catholic so that I can slander the Catholics and do so with impunity without people calling me a bigot. So there's our vice president. I unfortunately have one more clip from him I'd like to play. He was asked about the pardons. You might remember, it was only like 2 weeks ago. It was like 1 week after he became a Catholic. He was on TV and he said that obviously was already used, that they would not be pardoning people that violently attacked the police. Obviously that was wrong. And his daddy made a different decision a couple days later. Here's JD addressing that with CBS Face the Nation.
Daniel Rodriguez used an electroshock weapon against a policeman who was dragged out of the defensive line by plunging it into the officer's neck. He was imprisoned, sentenced to 12 years, 7 months. He got a pardon. Ronald Maccabee hit a cop while wearing reinforced brass knuckle gloves, and he held one down on the ground as other rioters assailed the officer for over 20 seconds, causing a concussion. If you stand with law enforcement, how can you call these people unjustly imprisoned?
Margaret, you're separating, there's an important issue here. There's what the people actually did on January the 6th, and we're not saying that everybody did everything perfectly. And then what did Merrick Garland's Department of Justice do in unjustly prosecuting well over 1,000 Americans in a way that was politically motivated?
Is violence like that against a police officer ever justified?
Violence against a police officer is not justified, but that doesn't mean that you should have Merrick Garland's weaponized Department of Justice expose you to incredibly unfair process, to denial of constitutional rights, and frankly, to a double standard that was not applied to many people, including, of course, the Black Lives Matter rioters who killed over 24 people and never had the weight of a weaponized Department of Justice come against them. The pardon power is not just for people who are angels or people who are perfect.
I can't. I keep waiting for the evidence of the Black Lives Matter protesters that attacked cops and killed people and weren't prosecuted for that. I don't. This keeps coming up in these interviews, but they never actually say the name of a person who got off. So I'm still waiting to hear that. But Bill, the pardon power isn't for people that's perfect. So beating a cop, whatever. Merrick Garland was too mean.
I mean, I assume these people, most of one hopes, and I believe it's the case, since I think, as you say, we would know the names of those who had gotten off, or the people who hadn't been, the murders for which there were prosecutions. They were prosecuted by state, obviously in the states in which these crimes happened, as most murder cases are, or assault cases. And this was a unique situation because it was in D.C. And it was an attack on the U.S. capitals. And so it made sense for the Department of Justice to take the lead, and it did. But again, they were convicted by juries. I mean, the degree of dishonesty in Vance's, and there are like 8 levels of dishonesty in Vance's answer, right? Right. It would be, well, it's like worth getting into. Yeah.
Speaking of which, on this topic, I've got a segment. We don't have theme music for it yet. I don't know if it's going to be a permanent segment. But over the weekend, I was struck by something, and it was in addition to JD. I was talking about how I forget who I was talking to about this. I was like, I don't understand why I knew that Trump was going to pardon the violent cop beaters, but his own vice president didn't. Like there is this. These guys have to kind of suspend disbelief about the nature of Donald Trump in order to continue to exist. It's something we saw the first time around, but we're really seeing it in spades this time. And so I've got 3 examples of gullible Republicans who seem to have been fooled by the nature of the man that they've made the president. And the first one is also on this topic of January 6th. Tom Tillis, senator from North Carolina. You can just hear the indignation in his voice when we play this. He is indignant that people are asking Pam Bondi to respond to a hypothetical about the possibility that Donald Trump might pardon a violent protester. This was just a few days before Donald Trump did pardon the violent protesters. Let's listen to indignant Tom Tillis.
On January 6th, a lot of people are going to say you're going to have a rubber stamp for letting people have pardons or recommending a pardon for people who did violence to law enforcement. I'm not going to ask you a hypothetical because I want you to be consistent and not answering them. But I have to believe, as a member, I was the last member out of the Senate on January the 6th. I walked past a lot of law enforcement officers, who were injured. I find it hard to believe that the President of the United States or you would look at facts that were used to convict the violent people on January the 6th and say it was just an intemperate moment. I don't even expect you to respond to that, but I think it's an absurd and unfair hypothetical here, and you probably haven't heard the last of it.
An absurd and unfair hypothetical. Never would Donald Trump pardon somebody that attacked a cop, Tom Tillis says 2 days before he pardons the cop beaters. Exactly what Tillis said he wouldn't do. What do you think, Bill? What's happening in this man's brain?
And never would he appoint to be director of the FBI. The FBI, which kind of an important agency in this respect. Kash Patel, or nominate to be head of the FBI, Kash Patel, who was a total defender of the most violent criminals from January 6th, never accepted the distinction that Tillis wants to make between the kind of innocent ones, the harmless ones, and the violent ones, was proud of his association with various violent criminals, and was having a hearing, I believe, Thursday before that same committee. So let's see if Senator Tillis says, Pam Bondi, she wasn't answering hypotheticals. I was wrong, Senator Tillis, about what President Trump would do. But to be fair, Pam Bondi wasn't presumably clued in either way, so she should still be Attorney General. But you, Mr. Patel, have been an explicit associate with, promoter of, and defender of these violent January 6th criminals. So I can't vote for you. Will Tillis say that?
That's a great question. We've invited Tom Tillis to come on the podcast. He's scared. So we'll see. Maybe Joe Perticone can shake him down on the Hill. I don't expect him to say that because he's worried about a primary. I don't know. Maybe in North Carolina, maybe the guy that was eating pizza in the back of the porn shop might primary him, and that's probably more kind of up the alley of Republican primary voters. We'll see. So Tom Tillis, indignant Tom Tillis. An absurd hypothetical. It's just you can't make it up. We got Susan Collins, his colleague in the Senate. In another story over the weekend, Trump fired 12, I believe, of the inspectors general, and he did not provide the 30-day notice that you're required to by law. I'd like to talk about that story more broadly, but here in the Republican gullibility section, here's Susan Collins' quote on this. I don't understand why one would fire individuals whose mission is to root out waste, fraud, and abuse. So this leaves a gap in what I know is a priority for President Trump. Could you help Susan understand that, Bill?
Someone told people like Susan Collins years ago that, the way you can persuade Trump is by making it seem that Trump cares about these things that you care about. And then you ascribe to him those views. And then he kind of realizes, yeah, it's kind of in his interest to pretend to care about these things. He's ignored all this for years. He's done fine ignoring Susan Collins. And of course, the idea that, geez, Trump really doesn't want abuse in any of these departments. The one thing he really, he doesn't want, he wants people there who are going to blow the whistle on contracts going to his buddies and political appointees, manhandling career civil servants in ways that are not legal and so forth. It's of course beyond farcical. Just this is a sidebar, but I think it's related in a way. What's interesting also is Trump's doing all these things. They're being done by nominal acting appointees. There's always an acting secretary in every department. There's always a chain of command, but they're people who are not even close to the top level. They've been put in temporarily. And of course, almost all the nominees haven't been confirmed. In a normal world, you would at least let the pretend to have, I'm asking the cabinet secretary to review the performance of these IGs, let the Pam Bondis and the whoever at all these different departments, Doug Burgum and all these guys, quote, review. Fine, they'll of course end up firing them in accord with the White House's wishes, but at least there's a certain patina of respectability, orderliness. Here so they had their list. They were going to go after all. Well, they didn't even have a list in this case. They just basically literally went after all of them. And if people should understand, I was in a department and dealt with the Inspector General quite a lot when I was chief of staff at the Education Department. Not too much. Thank God, we didn't do many things wrong, but they had issues and would come up and we'd talk about, we'd try to resolve them in an appropriate way. They are the watchdogs. Some are more effective than others. I'm sure they can't watchdog everything, but they are a check. They are a check, as Susan Collins said, on fraud and abuse. And again, there wasn't even a pretense that, well, this guy here in the Interior Department, I think it's time for a change there. Doug Burgum recommended that to me, that we're going to do that. Not even a pretense. It's just they're all gone.
Yeah, I have two thoughts on this. One on the Susan Collins point, just briefly. The idea that it is a priority for President Trump to root out fraud is just, you call it beyond farcical. It flies in the face of everything that we know about Donald Trump. Donald Trump's whole career has been premised on leveraging fraud successfully. He lied about how much money he was worth in businesses. The Apprentice is a farce. All of it, Trump water, Trump air. Trump's whole life has been a fraud. Trump loves fraud. What are you talking about? It's a priority for Donald Trump to root out fraud. That is that shows you know nothing about Donald Trump. It's like you were a baby who was just born yesterday and played straight into the United States Senate. The whole thing is just ridiculous.
Now you're going to tell me that Trump University, those degrees weren't important and weren't worth the thousands of dollars Trump milked out of people for those tens of thousands of dollars.
The guy ran a fake university. You think it's a priority for him to root out fraud? What are you talking about, Susan Collins? Anyway, the whole thing. But as far as the inspectors general, I do think there's a longer line potential of perniciousness here for me also, that I guess everybody's decided not to care about, because we're just going to not think about any long-term damage that Donald Trump could potentially do if you're a Trump enabler. But what exactly is the rationale, if a Democrat ever gets back in the White House, what exactly is the rationale for them to bring back Inspector General? Right? No president wants an Inspectors General. To your point, was the Secretary of Education ever excited to have a meeting with their Inspector General? No. Nobody the Inspector General are there to represent the people and the interests of the people, to make sure that our money is not being wasted, or that there's not other illegality happening, that any other cover-ups that help the administration not be accountable for actions that are harmful to the citizenry. That is the whole point of the Inspector General. So if they just blanket fire everybody, that to me it's well, okay, are Inspector General over now forever? Because who is going to be the president that's you know what, I really want to bring these guys back?
And is Trump going to even put in nominal inspectors general? I don't know. The Inspector General, if I'm not mistaken, the intelligence community was the person to whom people went in the summer of 2019 to report. Was it? Yeah, 2019, right? To report on the Ukraine what Trump was trying to do in withholding funds from Ukraine and sort of pressuring them to do a fake report on Biden, right? So they were actually, and it worked. I mean, and incidentally, the inspectors general have a relationship with Congress. So if they don't get satisfaction within the executive branch, there's the kind of threat that they'll go to the Congressional Oversight Committee. So this is also Congress's. We'll see if Congress responds at all, but Congress's. I'm not holding my breath for the Republican senators. So there they are running the Congress. They have inspectors general in these branches to help them, as Susan Collins might know, to root out fraud and abuse. And are they going to do anything serious about what Trump has done? I don't know. No.
I do find that hard to imagine. But if they were, you pointed this out, like they have opportunities to do things here. You wrote on social media over the weekend, if Grassley also claims to be upset about this, Collins, if the most straightforward pushback to these firings would be the Senate reasserting their power, and McConnell, Grassley, Ernst, Collins, and Murkowski saying they won't vote to confirm nominees until they're satisfied there'll be oversight in the agencies. They could do that.
They could.
But are you holding your breath? I'm not. On the Gullible Republicans list, so we have Tom Tillis, Susan Collins. I also need to shout out Congresswoman Maria Salazar down in Miami. She put out a very stern statement this morning. I'd like to read to you. She is urging Homeland Security to protect, all caps, Cubans awaiting legal status adjustment through the Cuban Adjustment Act, and we must also protect the Venezuelans and Nicaraguans without a critical criminal record going through the asylum process. Don't penalize them for Biden's screw-ups. I've got some bad news for you, Maria Salazar. These people don't. It wasn't even that they weren't taking Trump literally or seriously. They weren't listening to Donald Trump at all. Apparently, like the idea that Stephen Miller is planning an immigration regime that has very lenient asylum processes for nonviolent Venezuelans or Nicaraguans is ridiculous. They've completely shut down the CBP-1 app. People, they're trying to get asylum down to zero. That is what they're trying to do. There was a whole kerfuffle during the campaign Maria might not have heard about the Haitians and those that were here on temporary protected status. This administration doesn't plan on taking care of those people. So I just don't know what they thought that they were getting.
No. Yeah, how gullible are they? How much they pretending to be gullible because the alternative is more dishonorable, that they knew it was all a lie and they just went along because they were scared to take on Trump. I don't know.
I don't think that they're pretending. I don't know. I think that this is cope and how you survive in a rising authoritarian world, because there was an off the record briefing. I discussed this with Sam on the pod last week that he attended with a Republican senator, I believe, with the terms of that conversation, and the person seemed to not think Trump was going to do any of the bad things. You keep adding, it's like anytime it's like, well, what about the mass deportations? Wait, what about the violent pardons? What about this? It's like, well, no, all of that stuff, no. We're just gonna get the tax cuts and Doge and no wars. So I do think that they have convinced themselves, but we'll continue to monitor Gullible Republican Hour. This podcast is sponsored by Naked Wines. It's 2025. Getting naked and drinking wine seems about as good an idea as anything else. Naked Wines is a service that directly connects you with the world's finest independent winemakers, so you can get award-winning wine delivered straight to your door. Use the Bulwark for the code and password at nakedwines.com and get their incredible deal of 6 bottles for just $39.99. I got a round of Naked Wines sent to the house the other day, which is what's the fun part for me was you're getting to try out some different grapes, different varietals, things. So I'm making some pasta for dinner. Try a little red, have one glass, see how you like it. Leave the bottle open, cork it, and it's a little something to do. We all need little joys in our life, little lane, yep. And the Naked Wines has been one for me. I've got 4 more bottles sitting down there, excited to try them all out. Naked Wines connects winemakers and wine drinkers directly, allowing for vineyard-to-your-door delivery at up to 60% off what you'd pay in the store. By cutting out the traditional retail middleman costs and markups, winemakers can pass those savings on to you without skimping on quality. Now is the time to join the Naked Wines community. Head to nakedwines.com/thebulwark, click Enter Voucher, and put in my code, THEBULWARK, for both the code and password for 6 bottles of wine for just $39.99 with shipping included. That's $100 off your first 6 bottles at nakedwines.com/thebulwark and use the code and password, THEBULWARK, for 6 bottles of wine for $39.99. The news this morning I want to talk about. There's an executive order Trump signed banning trans service members. I do think that there is something particularly gross about a draft dodger banning people who had volunteered for service. The executive order, or I don't know if it's the same one or a separate one, also reinstates service members that were kicked out for not taking vaccines that were required by the military. So we're just doing straight political effort to kick people out of the military if they're trans, bring people back who, whatever, disobeyed orders. I'm open to that, possibly that being something that is smart. I never served in the military. I kind of will defer to Hertling and others on whether it is smart to reinstate those folks. It's possible, but it is pretty galling to do so at the same time that you're kicking people out who haven't done anything wrong, and that you're doing so to appease like racist Twitter users and Reddit posters like that. We're gonna take keyboard warriors and appease them, and we're gonna kick out people that volunteered to serve in the country because they're transgender. It's pretty gross.
Yeah, terrible. And it's not even an issue of, I don't know, should the government pay for certain treatments and procedures people want going forward? I mean, maybe you can, I think it's kind of hard to distinguish, but, maybe people could make some kind of colorable, plausible argument on that. These are just people. I mean, they're just people who we don't know. Some of them have transitioned 10 years ago, some 2 years ago, some are in the midst of it conceivably. But anyway, you're just kicking out people for who they are. I mean, that's right. You're not like denying. It's a little more plausibly legitimate, though not really, to deny a service, as it were, a special service, right, to someone. This is just discrimination, flat out,
It's flat out discrimination.
And would they not get to serve in? Well, I don't know. What about the Defense Department? Are they going to go after the civilians there too? If any of them are transgender people, I don't know.
Yeah, a lot of this stuff is pretty hackneyed, so I think it remains to be seen. But it is it's pretty depressing. I will say. Also, just I'm trying to ban. We're not going to be able to ban it. I'm trying to limit from the podcast the whole, but what about the price of eggs going up? Because it's already a little cliche and all this, but it is telling. We're here. We are in week 2, and the tangible actions that they have really been focused on are all of the culture war actions, right? Like for the first 2 weeks, they have betrayed the notion of the Wall Street Journal types, who are like, well, we're really going to focus on economic issues and economic growth. Maybe all that stuff's coming. I guess they did do the announcement about the investment in AI, which then Elon Musk, shadow president, said was fake immediately afterwards. But they're really dialing in on this. And I think the contract is particularly sharp this morning because, as we're taping this, it looks like stocks are down significantly. We had this Chinese AI application, DeepSeek, that launched. And it appears to be a strong competitor, if not superior, to ChatGPT and the American AI apps. You can't trust anything that the Chinese government says, but apparently it was created in about a year, more cheaply than the amount of money that we're investing in these apps. So it has had a negative impact across kind of all the big tech stocks that have been pumping up the market. And so, again, we're about to enter into some very serious times, and I think that the trans service member ban this morning, just in addition to being straight bigotry, just like the lack of focus on the serious matters before us is in pretty stark relief this morning.
Well, on the economic thing, the one thing he does seem to want to do is put tariffs on everyone.
Yeah.
That one, which the Wall Street Journal was, desperately hoping wasn't serious, and he'll be talked out of that by his serious advisors. So there's a dispute with Colombia about whether they'll take people being repatriated if they're treated in some ways or flown on a military plane. That's just Trump showing off when the military is involved. Biden, I believe, every 2 or 3 days in the Biden administration, a plane full of people being repatriated went to Colombia. The Biden administration deported a lot of people who were there, who were criminals and who were had been apprehended. And there was no issue with Colombia. I think it was the same president then. Now this guy, the president, maybe caused more of a ruckus than he should have because Trump, chose to use military planes. Doesn't really matter. I don't know. Maybe he should just take them in. And I guess they now worked out something. But Trump's first response was tariffs, right? I mean, it's the one thing he believes in economics, actually. And I do think there was an article, I think yesterday, or something, that February 1st, people are now increasingly thinking he is going to slap just an across the board 25% tariff on Canada and Mexico. So kind of incentive to get them, I don't know to do what actually, but are they
close
is Canada being very mean to us? I don't know,
Yeah, the Colombia trade war thing is also telling just kind of about how they plan to do propaganda.
Yeah, I agree.
The second Trump term, and like this all happens within 24 hours. Pedro sends back the deportation flight because it was a military plane with people in shackles. He had accepted deportation flights under Biden. Trump then threatens the tariffs. Pedro threatens them back. His statement, people should go read, if not just for it is so bizarre. It is so interesting. It's so un-American. Just like the tone of it is worth. He name checks Walt Whitman and Paul Simon, and it's a journey. The reciprocal tariff statement. I'll put it in the show notes for people. But then behind the scenes, there's essentially an agreement. As you said, that we're back to the status quo. They'll accept the deportation flights, just not in the way that the Trump regime had wanted to do it. And Trump declares victory. Right, oh look, the tariff threat really worked, and all the MAGA media accounts are pushing that this was a victory. That is a thing that's going to be kind of hard to combat, right? He is going to be very good at creating for his people the sense that he did these that these victories have been achieved when nothing actually happened, and he really just put us at risk, honestly, and he's created additional risk and additional tension with an ally. So and got nothing out of it, but they're going to spin these things as propaganda victories.
Yes, but some of these things won't work out quite as nicely as bullying Colombia a little bit and their president may have worked out. We don't know yet, obviously, quite. Yeah. So I think he could get us into trade wars and genuine price hikes because of tariffs. The propaganda side of it is underrated. I myself, I feel like I've underrated that. You don't want to believe that it works, and so you sort of discount it. But you think Dr. Phil has been embedded with ICE or the Border Patrol, or in Chicago for these raids. It's so ludicrous and jaw dropping and inappropriate. I mean, these are very serious things, Tim. We have too many. We have criminals, undocumented immigrants who are criminals. It's very sensitive. We are having precise raids to go snatch them, and it's the professionalism of ICE and the Border Patrol. And how dare these cities try not to cooperate and stand in the way? And incidentally, we have Dr. Phil in there to as part of the show. I mean, how can you take seriously? And there are some. Biden did deport plenty of people. There are people who should be deported. I mean, how do you take it seriously though? When it is the propaganda swamps everything else.
Yeah. You wrote about the Colombia thing that there's a pretty clear pattern that Trump's picking fights with allies and signaling weakness to dictatorial adversaries right out of the box. It is. And I guess that we did see this in the first term, with him picking fights with Merkel and all that. But the difference to me seems like I think they're ready to to commit capricious attacks, economically or otherwise, on our allies, and almost have an itchy trigger finger to do so this time, which is a little different than the mean tweets.
No, I think that's an interesting point. I mean, I myself couldn't take the Greenland thing seriously, and it came up in the first term. But the degree to which he's been prosecuting it, so to speak, this term, this first 10 days, it was week of his administration, as opposed to 2019, where it kind of came up and then it disappeared. It was people like Pompeo and others just put it on a back burner. I mean, that's where you have Pete Hegseth is going to, he's thrilled, right? Since his idea of being sec def is, writing something and DEI, DOD does not equal DEI. And that's his first act. Really, he becomes Secretary of Defense of the United States of America, in charge of 1.5 million people in the military, a lot of civilians at DOD, huge responsibilities around the world. And his act is this performative childishness. And that's how he thinks of his job. And it's really, in this respect, it is, the propaganda stuff's infuriating or annoying, but this is serious. This is bad. This is really bad.
And I also think, think about it from an incentive structure standpoint. I was reading the Petro statement. And to me, it's just about going forward. Trump is not popular anywhere except for here and a handful of other countries, mostly with autocratic leaders, right? He's not popular in the countries with our democratic allies, either to the south of us or in Europe. And so if you're one of these leaders, it actually, I know that there'll be one side of the coin that says, well, Trump can bully them because they need America and they need American products and it helps their economy. And that's all true. But if you just have a couple of these leaders that are themselves just looking at the pure political side of it, the optics, it helps them unless there's actual pain, up until the point that there's actual economic pain in the country. It helps them politically to be seen as the person standing up to Trump. Right, it butches them up a little bit. Domestically, he's not popular. Makes you seem strong, and so Petro's statement was pretty strident, and Scheinbaum's has been in Mexico as well. And so I don't know. It's a bit of a powder keg. I think that this idea that all these guys are going to just bend over like the Republican senators have, I think is incorrect. And again, it misunderstands the incentive structure of some of these leaders.
And it also misunderstands that China and others can step in. And I guess China already has said that about Colombia. Now we're much closer, and presumably China can't quite do what we might do in terms of trade with Colombia, but they can do some things to help out if we're raising tariffs and stuff. And so again, it's, if you care about fighting China, the balance of power with China, other adversaries, this is crazy, right? There are times when you have to, in a tough situation, be a little rude to allies, perhaps, if they're not being, this happened in the Cold War a lot, and we paid some price domestically in some of these other countries. This is totally and utterly gratuitous. This is entirely for Trump's vanity, right? Really. And as you say, propaganda. And especially if you beat up a country like Colombia, which has, a fair number of undocumented people here, and it's a country that's had troubles in the past, though it seems to have done pretty well the last 15, 20 years with our help, incidentally, bipartisan basis. Bush and Obama signed a free trade agreement with Colombia, which has helped the economy there a lot. Nonetheless, for Trump's base, it's good to be fighting with those people down there in Central Latin America, right?
Frum made this point about Colombia that I think is worth sharing, because there's always so much negativity about, things are so terrible. This is why the American people had to turn to Trump, because of all of the crises in this country over the past 2 decades. But as Frum points out, rescuing Colombia from civil war, redirecting its economy from drugs to lawful commerce was a supreme achievement of the Bush and Obama administrations. The U.S.-Colombia Free Trade Agreement was negotiated by Bush, signed by Obama, and has served both countries well. Now what? And it's right. We're blowing this up for what? Over nothing? Because Donald Trump wants to play tough guy in some reality TV show. It's preposterous. But it does feel like there's also a lack of, particularly this time around, Trump 2.0, a lack of desire for people to say things like Frum is saying this blatantly. No, actually, we have done some good things, right? Everybody has to just accept as basis that, well, our institutions are so broken, and that's why we turn to Trump. And so there's nobody, you know what I mean? It does feel like there is a dearth of people making the case for, the rules-based order that got us here.
Yeah, and I totally know. I've tried to make this point a couple of times. JVL made this point too. That I mean, especially on the international side, I mean, can we just, can people take a minute and think about the first half of the 20th century and then the 75 years, 3/4 of a century since the first half of the 20th century? I mean, there's a pretty simple test case. It's not too complicated. It divides up kind of neatly. And I think the arguments are pretty strongly, and I made this point about Germany. I mean, the principle of the AfD in Germany is that Germany is a nightmare, and it's been a disaster to have come to grips with their past, and then by coming to grips with it, move beyond it, and to be proud to be a liberal democratic state, proud to be part of the EU and of human rights treaties and so forth. That's the AfD's claim, its agenda. And we have Elon Musk, very close confidant to the President of the United States, just endorsing it.
I want to finish with the latest from Ukraine and Russia. We don't have T-shirts on the website, Bill, that say Bill and Tim are always right, because I have humility, and we've had some misses. Some of our colleagues do have those T-shirts if people want to invest in that. But one thing that you were early on, and we've been talking about almost every week, is like there was almost a unified feeling, I think, on the right and the left, that if Trump won, that there was some backroom deal happening with Putin, and that that there would be a cessation of violence, and that they'd cut some sort of deal, and there'd be a friendly to Putin deal, and then who knows, some things might change in a couple of years, but like that would come to pass. And you were skeptical of that. A couple of other people I've had on the pod, Michael Weiss was skeptical of that. And we had the head of the Council for Foreign and Defense Policy for Russia, Sergei Karaganov, over the weekend, a prominent advisor to Lavrov and Putin, a serious advisor to them, saying this: Russia must escalate in 2025 to force our American enemy to crawl away so Russia can finish off the Europeans. That's A, pretty alarming, and B, but kind of in line with what we have been expecting, right?
I mean, the Trump people seem to believe they can get at least a face-saving deal for them, so that there's not an immediate disaster. Putin, I'm not sure that Putin wants to give him a face-saving deal. Putin might benefit more around the world by just humiliating the U.S., and Trump is the president of the U.S., so he's happy enough to humiliate Trump. For all of Trump's affinity for Putin, Putin is never quite reciprocated, right? Wouldn't you say? He treats Trump with a certain amount of contempt, like at Helsinki in 2018 and stuff.
Kind of subtle Russian mockery at times that maybe goes over Trump's head.
Yeah, that could be.
So I'm worried about the boorish mockery that Trump likes to give.
And then some of my friends who are adjacent to Trump world think, well, Trump, if he sees that it's really a disaster, he doesn't care about anyone dying or hundreds of thousands of people, or millions of refugees, or a nation being crushed. But if he sees it could be a political problem for him, maybe he'll do something. So they're busy writing articles, which I don't criticize them for, because it's the right thing to do, I think, in this case, to try to appeal to him somehow. It'd be politically be bad for you, if Ukraine is crushed and is a just nightmarish situation, and millions of refugees and deaths, and et cetera. I don't know. I mean, maybe that could make Trump get a little tougher. There's just no evidence, though. I hope he will, for the sake of Ukraine and of the world. Is there any area where the range of possibilities was Trump will do the extreme things he said he's going to do, or he's going to be more cautious and moderate? Really, I'd say the bulk of areas he's going in. It's only a week in the extreme and radical direction, wouldn't you say? I mean,
yeah, and I think that there's some TBDs. Right. I don't think that there are any cases where he has clearly gone the moderating direction. Right. We haven't seen it yet on tariffs. We haven't really seen it yet on immigration. We're a little bit in the fog of war side on that right now. So I think that is to be determined. A lot of this damaging stuff. I want to have longer conversations this week about like what's happening with NIH and funding of kind of health studies. All that stuff's temporary. So it's kind of like, well, let's see what happens in April. So there are opportunities, I guess, for him to moderate in various ways still, but we haven't seen it.
And in the case of the immigration executive orders and the NIH, funding stops, I mean, there was a way to do it that would have been tough, and we wouldn't have liked it, I don't think, where he would have said, okay, you have 90 days to justify every single one of these study groups in NIH and review processes. Obviously, they're going to go on for now because people are in the middle, literally, of doing these studies and reviewing proposals. But but the Secretary of HHS in 90 days is going to tell me which ones we should cancel, how we should change the thing. That's sort of that would be pretty tough, actually, but that would be a sort of more reasonable way to do it. The willingness to just cut the stuff off, to take a little bit of a PR hit, presumably, when the implications of stopping everything at NIH hit through. When you see the executive order, the executive orders in immigration, I would say, are very much in this direction, that they're on the radical side of what he could have done that still would have been very tough, and still pretty negative. So and now the hope is, well, the executive orders and the rhetoric and the pauses, and those are on the radical side. But maybe 60 or 90 days from now, he walks back from that a little. And I hope he does for the sake of the country in some ways. And maybe he will in some of these cases if there's enough political pressure. But it's not heartening. It's not heartening.
Yeah. One last thing on just what you said on the Ukraine side to close the loop on that. I agree with you. Sure. If there are Republican security types who are in Trump's orbit who want to try to appeal to him and make the argument that it'd be politically beneficial for him to be supportive of Ukraine, I'll take it. Whatever, that's fine. But I do think it is also just wrong. Like, it's gullible and incorrect. If you're doing it knowing that, kind of knowing this and hoping that you can get a good result, that's a noble effort. You should do that. They should continue to do that. But just objectively, as somebody like spending time with, going at that TPUSA event at America Fest, like watching and consuming, kind of MAGA media, like the not supporting Ukraine is just like the ante among that base right now. I mean, like that, if like among things that they care about, like that is about at the top of the list, and it gets tied into everything, right? Like in the fires, it's like, oh, we're only spending X on the fires, but we're giving Y to Ukraine. I mean, like they are just trashing the support from Ukraine just across the board on any MAGA platform. It's even like 1 inch to the MAGA side of Fox, and so I think that he is going to feel very handcuffed by that and like obligated to follow through on his plans to further abandon the Ukrainians. I mean, maybe the Senate can do things, maybe there are other ways to kind of delay all that, but anyway,
I would just
think that's the state
sadly, I mean, I think, so I've been told you've heard this, that, the two questions that are asked almost of all the political appointees, whatever they're, certainly in the foreign policy, national security areas, but maybe beyond, they have to be okay on January 6th. They have to be okay on Ukraine, which means willing to sell out, eager sometimes to sell Ukraine. So it's not as if he's going to be getting that much pushback from the second and third ranks of his own administration, at least from the political appointees, and they're weakening the career civil service. So in the first term, there was a lot of pushback. We know that from the 2019 impeachment. There was Fiona Hill, there was Alexander Vindman, there were people in there who were saying, ooh. And so that did have an effect, ultimately, stopped some of the worst things from happening. There's not going to be that. So, as you say, MAGA on the outside is fervently for the betrayal of Ukraine, as they were for the pardon of all the rioters. I come back to the pardon where we began. I fear that was indicative, right? That was a place where he had a clear choice. And you could argue that even if he thought of it in his own self-interest, the better choice was the J.D. Vance way, much easier to defend. And instead he went all the way, so to speak, went all in. And you'd have to explain why he's not going to do that in some of these other areas, I'm afraid.
I agree. Well, pretty disheartening day across the board there. Maybe by, I don't know, who knows? One of these
cheered
Mondays,
up at least by the football results?
I'm not cheered up by the football at all. It's horrible. It's like, it's like Trump versus DeSantis.
Why are people so excited this way? I haven't followed it that closely, but Mahomes is. why are people anti-Kansas City? He's a great coach. He's a great coach, and Mahomes is a great quarterback. So what's not to like?
Okay, well, it's fine. I hated Kansas City growing up. They were division rivals of the Broncos.
Well, you have it legit. But why are people so anti-Kansas City, honestly?
I just think they're sick of it.
People
are sick of it. And also just all the attempt, and Taylor and Travis getting thrown into people's faces. I was watching some sports podcast, and there was like it was a non-political sports podcast, and the guy's like, I don't want to hear about Elon Musk or Travis Kelce or Taylor Swift again. Like, they're the only three people anybody talks about. And so I think that there's a little bit of that. But so not much good news. And well, for anybody who's worried about all of these topics we went over and all of the negative affairs that are plaguing our nation, the minority leader, the Democratic leader in the House, had these words of solace. Presidents come and presidents go. Through it all, God is still on the throne. So there's that. Maybe that'll make some folks feel better. I've got this. I do have one other thing, Bill. I do have one good thing that I can leave people with. Timothée Chalamet's Bob Dylan covers on Saturday Night Live. He does 3 deep cuts. That was amazing. That is what brings me solace. Bill Kristol, I think you're on holiday next Monday, so we'll see you in 2 Mondays. Does that sound right?
It does sound right. Thanks, Tim.
All right. Everybody else, we'll be back here tomorrow. We'll see you all then. Peace.